Arya Stark stood atop the walls of Winterfell, the cold night air pressing in on her. A single torch sputtered beside her, its flames dancing in the wind that carried the distant howls of dire wolves and the echoing memories of ancient battles. She could see the quiet yard below, the courtyard where she had trained with Brienne of Tarth, the place where she had taken so many tentative steps toward reclaiming the part of herself she had once thought lost forever. The darkness beyond Winterfell's walls seemed full of ghosts. Arya let her mind wander to the faces of her family, those living and those gone. She thought of her father, stoic and kind, teaching her about honor and justice. She thought of Jon, who was somewhere in the castle, poring over battle strategies with Daenerys, preparing for the next war, the war that would decide the fate of all the living. It was impossible to forget that the enemy they faced this time wasn't just another ambitious lord or a faceless tyrant. The White Walkers loomed beyond the horizon, a threat older and colder than anything she'd ever known. Her breath crystallized as she exhaled, and she steadied her mind. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, they would clash with death itself. But tonight, she had a moment of quiet. She ran her gloved fingers along the stone battlements, feeling the ancient texture beneath her palm. Her gaze drifted to the sky where the stars glittered like shards of ice. She remembered Gendry's face when she told him she wouldn't be his lady, remembered the softness in his eyes. She pushed the thought away. Arya Stark was no lady, she never had been. She was a survivor, a killer, and though some part of her yearned for warmth, she knew better than to let herself believe in simple endings. Deep in her pocket was the small piece of parchment she kept, her list. The names had shifted over the years, some crossed out with brutal finality, others left behind by time's hand. But Cersei Lannister's name remained. Even after all the changes, all the battles and betrayals, that name still lingered like a hook in her soul. Arya's lips thinned as she thought of the woman who had orchestrated her father's downfall, the woman who had tried to destroy her family. She knew, before the end, Cersei had to die. She believed it with a fervor that heated her blood in the icy wind. She looked down at the training yard again. Ghostly shadows flickered across the ground where the pale moonlight shone. She imagined the lessons she had once shared with Syrio Farrell, the Braavosi sword master who taught her to see with more than just her eyes. She remembered the house of black and white, the feel of the masks of the faceless men, the weight of all those identities pressed against her mind. That training had molded her into a weapon, had taught her how to kill without mercy, how to become no one. Yet here she was, Arya Stark, still clinging to her identity and her vendettas. The hush was broken by the shriek of the wind, and she remembered where she truly stood, on the precipice of a battle for all existence. Inside the castle, the others prepared. Daenerys Targaryen, her silver hair a stark contrast to the blackness of the night, was surely strategizing with Tyrion Lannister and Varys. Jon, who was both her brother and not, likely wrestled with the truth of his parentage and the duty he felt toward the north. Sansa, wise and unyielding, guarded Winterfell in her own way, orchestrating supplies, rations, and moral support for the people who looked to her for leadership. Bran was in his own world, drifting through time. And the Hound, he was probably cursing at the quiet, unsettled by the calm before the storm. Arya let herself linger for a moment in the memory of her father's voice, hearing his gentle insistence that she could be anything, that she had a strength that went beyond ladylike grace. Then she straightened her spine, turned, and moved down the steps, the torch's flicker guiding her. The journey ahead required all the skills she possessed, all the determination she could muster. The war with the Night King was coming, but she had another war in mind as soon as it was done. In the Great Hall, the long tables were mostly deserted. Most people had retired to find what rest they could before the battle. She noticed the half-eaten bowls of stew, the tankards of ale left half-drunk. A dog prowled at the edge of the hall, sniffing for scraps. The fire in the hearth was low, but she felt its welcome warmth as soon as she stepped inside. She made her way to a small table where the Hound sat, hunched over a mug of ale, scowling at the flames. "You're out late," he grumbled, his scarred face creasing in something that might have been concern, or at least the Hound's version of it. "And you're drinking alone?" she replied, slipping into the seat opposite him without asking for permission. He shrugged and took a swig from his mug. They sat in silence for a moment, the embers of the fire shifting and crackling. Arya's mind turned to the possibility that neither of them would survive the coming onslaught. She recalled the many times she had sworn to kill him, the many times she had nearly let him die. Yet here they were, side by side, both survivors of impossible odds. He rolled his shoulders. "Can't fight death sober," he muttered. Arya let a small, humorless smile twist her lips. "We'll see about that," she said, touching the Valyrian steel dagger hidden at her side. She'd used it before to protect Bran, she would do it again if she had to. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The hound's eyes flicked over to her with something akin to respect, though he'd never say it aloud. They both knew what was coming, an army of the dead. But after that, the war wouldn't end. Cersei Lannister still claimed the Iron Throne, and there was no room in the realm for two queens. More importantly, there was no room in the world for the woman who had inflicted such horror on the Stark family. The quiet stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and unacknowledged hopes. Then Arya stood. "I'm going to find rest," she said, though she doubted she would sleep. The hound nodded or tilted his head in acknowledgement. She left him there, contemplating his ale, each of them alone in the face of destiny. In her small chamber, Arya removed her leathers and boots, setting them neatly aside. She patted the dagger under her pillow, the one she had taken from Littlefinger's corpse. As she lay down, the torches in the hallway cast dancing shadows on the ceiling. She allowed her thoughts to drift once more to Cersei. The woman's name was etched into her memory, her soul. No matter what happened with the Night King, no matter how many battles were fought, Arya knew she would find a way to end Cersei's life. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The dawn arrived in muted grays and blues, the sky overcast. Warriors from every corner of Westeros and beyond assembled in the courtyard. Dothraki outriders clutched their araks, unsmiling, while unsullied soldiers stood in perfect lines, their spears held with rigid discipline. The Northerners were scattered, men and women bearing the sigils of houses great and small, all coming together for this final stand against the dead. Arya stood among them, feeling tension coil through the crowd. Ghost, Jon's dire wolf, prowled at the edges. A war horn sounded, a long, mournful note that echoed off the walls of Winterfell. She felt the vibration in her bones. Jon was at the forefront, astride a horse cloaked in black and gray. Daenerys, regal in white fur, was beside him. Above them soared two dragons, their shrieks cutting through the cold air like knives. Arya caught glimpses of fear on some faces, fear of the dragons, fear of the undead, fear of what they could not understand. She could not blame them. This battle would be unlike any other, a fight for existence. The plan was straightforward in theory. Jon and Daenerys would engage the Night King and his generals, the Dothraki would charge, and the Unsullied would hold the line. Bran waited in the godwood as bait for the Night King. Arya, meanwhile, was to protect Bran if he was in danger and to kill any White Walkers that came too close. The tension in the air felt suffocating. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the moment when death itself would arrive. Arya felt a light touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Sansa, face drawn, pale. "Come back," Sansa whispered. Arya placed a hand over hers. "You survived Joffrey, Ramsay, and Littlefinger. You'll survive this. And so will I." The courtyard gates opened. The Dothraki charged into the gloom, their araks lit aflame by Melisandre's magic. Their war cries tore through the air, sending a chill down Arya's spine. From the battlements, the sight of their blazing weapons was a brief spark of hope in an ocean of darkness. Then the lights vanished, snuffed out by an enemy that consumed everything in its path. It was as though a piece of the night had simply swallowed them. The Whites came. They arrived in a ferocious wave of corpses that slammed into the Unsullied ranks. Arrows filled the air, flaming shafts arcing down upon the undead army. Arya stood on the battlements, bow in hand, loosing arrow after arrow until her quiver was empty. She could barely see the enemy, only the mass of bodies, the swirling darkness, the screams. Snow flurry swirled, part ice, part ash. She was aware of the combined roar of men and monsters, the clang of steel, the snarling of dire wolves and dragons. Somewhere, the Night King appeared on his undead dragon, spraying frigid blue fire across the battlefield. Jon and Daenerys soared overhead, Drogon's flames cutting through the darkness. But still the dead surged forward. When her arrows were spent, Arya left the battlements to fight hand to hand. The courtyard was chaos, flames, blood, and horror. Dragonglass swords and spears flashed in the flickering light. The stench of decay filled her nostrils. She cut down white after white, moving as she had been trained, slipping between thrusts and snapping jaws. She risked a glance toward the godwood, where Bran was supposed to be protected by Theon and his Ironborn. That was the Night King's true goal, she reminded herself. She had to be there. She ducked a White's wild swing, slashing across its midsection with her dragonglass dagger. It collapsed. Another came, then another. The clang of steel was a deafening roar around her. She spotted the hound near a knot of Whites, cursing and hacking away with raw brutality. The relentless assault threatened to overwhelm them all. She was battered to her knees when a White lunged at her. She thrust upward, her dagger piercing its skull. Gasping, she shoved the corpse aside, scrambling to her feet. A wave of dragon fire swept across the courtyard, incinerating a swath of the undead. She felt the searing heat, turned her face away. The sound of shrieking Whites pierced the night. When the flames died, Arya bolted for the godwood. The ground was littered with broken bodies. Blood slicked the mud. Every step she took felt like a battle in itself, forcing her way through the press of fighters. At last, she reached the weirwood trees. Theon's men formed a protective circle. Bran was there, motionless in his wheelchair, his eyes rolled back, lost in his visions. The moment Arya saw them, she felt the temperature drop. An aura of unnatural cold hung in the air. The whites parted and the Night King appeared, pale as the moon, with White Walkers flanking him. Theon and his men fought valiantly, but the Night King was relentless, scattering them like leaves. Theon charged bravely, only to be struck down, left bleeding in the snow. The White Walkers converged on Bran. Arya sprinted, calling on every ounce of skill. She aimed her dagger at one White Walker, sliding beneath its sweeping blade and plunging the Valyrian steel into its flank. Shattered into shards of ice. Another advanced. She spun, blocking its strike, then driving her dragonglass dagger into its chest. She could see, over her enemy's shoulder, the Night King stepping closer to Bran. Panic surged. She feinted around a third White Walker, trying to break free, but it was too fast, forcing her to parry again. In a desperate move, she kicked it back, hearing the crunch of ice. She caught a glimpse of Jon Snow rushing in, Longclaw flashing. He engaged the Night King with a shout, steel clashing against ice. The White Walkers hissed, moving to intercept him, but Arya's presence had drawn them away. She staggered to her feet, bleeding from a small cut on her arm, searching for another weapon. The ground was littered with broken spears and swords. Her eyes landed on Theon's dropped blade, Valyrian steel. She snatched it up. Her focus snapped to Jon, struggling against the Night King's formidable strength. She heard the ring of steel on ice, saw sparks dance. The Night King seemed to overpower Jon, stepping forward with lethal precision. Jon struck, but the Night King batted the blade away like it was a toy. A savage kick sent Jon sprawling. Arya saw an opening and leaped, raising the sword high. The Night King turned with supernatural speed, icy eyes narrowing as he prepared to cleave her in half with his own blade of cold crystal. She twisted midair, remembering the trick she had used on Brienne. She dropped her sword from one hand to the other. The Night King's strike whistled past her. In one fluid motion, she caught the sword in her other hand and plunged it into his side. The Night King's eyes widened, and a sound like cracking ice erupted from his body. Frost spiderwebbed across his armor, and he shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. All around them, White Walkers crumbled into fragments of ice, and the whites collapsed, lifeless once more. Arya fell to her knees, breath ragged. Jon blinked in disbelief, then rushed to Bran. Theon was beyond saving, but Bran was unscathed. The surge of relief that swept Winterfell was palpable. The threat of the undead was vanquished. In the days that followed, the survivors burned their dead and tended to the wounded. Snow melted under the heat of funeral pyres. The stench of charred flesh hung over Winterfell, but there was also a sense of grim satisfaction. Against all odds, they had won. Arya walked the courtyards in a haze, unsure of what to do next. The threat of the Night King had consumed them all, and now it was gone. But one name remained on her list, one last debt of blood she needed to repay. Cersei Lannister, the queen on the Iron Throne, who had tried to tear her family apart. She felt no guilt over the obsession. If anything, the end of the Night King renewed her resolve. Winterfell buzzed with talk of the next war. Cersei had not lent a hand against the undead, choosing instead to fortify her hold on King's Landing. Daenerys and Jon, locked in their own turmoil over the truth of Jon's lineage, debated their next move. The armies were weakened, the dragons exhausted, but the path was clear. They would march south to dethrone Cersei. In a war council meeting, Daenerys stood at the head of a long table, maps spread out before her. Tyrion, Varys, Grey Worm, Sansa, Jon, and Arya were among those present. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Cersei will expect us to be weak from the battle, Daenerys said. We are, but we're not broken. We must strike quickly before she can strengthen her position further. Jon nodded. We have the North's allegiance, but our forces are diminished. We have to be cautious. Sansa's expression was frosty, arms crossed over her chest. Winterfell needs time to recover. The people need to know they're safe before we send more men to die. Tyrion looked thoughtful. Cersei has the Golden Company and Euron Greyjoy rules the seas. We can't simply march in. We risk another massacre. The council argued back and forth. Arya stood apart, mind already drifting south. She had no desire to wait for a grand siege or a prolonged campaign. She wanted Cersei's blood on her hands sooner rather than later. When the meeting ended without a firm conclusion, only the knowledge that war was inevitable, Arya slipped away. She found Bran in the Godwood under the ancient weirwood tree. He stared at her with distant, otherworldly eyes. "You're leaving," he stated. She wasn't surprised he knew. "Yes," she answered simply. "To kill her." Bran's gaze seemed to pierce time itself. He didn't respond immediately, only nodded. A wind rustled the red leaves overhead. "Then go," he said. "Do what you must." That was all the farewell Arya needed. She left Winterfell quietly, taking only what she needed, her weapons and a supply of food. She traveled quickly, alone. But when she reached the gates in the dead of night, she found the Hound waiting, mounted on a horse, cloak flapping in the cold wind. "You really think you're going to kill her by yourself?" he asked, tone gruff. She eyed him warily. "Why do you care?" "Cersei's got a big ugly monster guarding her," he said. "I've got some unfinished business with him. You're not the only one who wants her dead." His voice rumbled with a bitterness that resonated with Arya's own. She didn't argue. Together, they rode out of Winterfell under the pale moon. They traveled south, avoiding main roads and blending with refugees heading away from the war-torn north. The land was ravaged, farms burned to the ground, villages empty. They passed the Trident, where echoes of the wars of the past lingered. News traveled slower than rumors, but they heard whispers that Daenerys and Jon were planning to march as well, though more slowly, burdened by large armies. Arya and the Hound moved with stealth and speed. Nights were spent in abandoned huts or beneath the open sky. They rarely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts of vengeance. The Hound cursed the cold, cursed the meager rations, but he never turned back. Arya practiced with her dagger each evening, remembering every step of the dance she had perfected in Bravos, the lethal grace that had allowed her to slay the Night King. After days of hard riding, King's Landing rose before them, red walls and looming towers set against the shimmering bay. The capital looked deceptively peaceful from a distance, its hustle muted by the great stone walls. Arya's memories of the city were fraught with fear and pain. She recalled her father's execution, the horrors she had witnessed in Flea Bottom. But she was no frightened girl now. Night had fallen by the time they found a safe place to tether their horses in a small patch of woods near the old walls. The Hound settled against a tree trunk, arms folded. "How do we get in without an army?" Arya surveyed the city's outline, remembering the hidden passages beneath the Red Keep. She had glimpsed them in her younger days and heard rumor of them through spies and whispers. "There are tunnels," she said, voice low. "We'll go in quietly." He nodded, seemingly content to let her lead. As darkness deepened, they approached a little-used postern gate near the Mud Gate, a place known for smugglers. Lannister soldiers stood guard, but their vigilance was lax. The Hound provided a terse distraction, pretending to be a traveler in need of directions, while Arya slipped a lockpick into the iron latch. Moments later, the gate swung open and they vanished into the shadowy alleys beyond. The city stank of refuse and rot. Rats scurried along the muddy streets. Dim lantern light flickered from a few windows as people huddled indoors, worried about a war they could sense was coming. Arya and the Hound kept to the backways, avoiding patrols. They found a small, abandoned building where they could hide for the night, waiting for a better chance to move on the Red Keep. The Hound slumped against a wall, sword across his knees, while Arya peered through a grimy window at the looming castle in the distance. Somewhere in that fortress was Cersei. The next night, Arya set out alone to scout. She crept through the twisting streets, silent as a shadow, until she reached an ancient sewer entrance that led to a labyrinth of tunnels. Iron bars blocked the way, but they were rusted, and she managed to pry them loose. She descended, torch flickering, following her memory of clandestine passages rumored to connect with the bowels of the Red Keep. The tunnels smelled of damp and decay, water dripping endlessly. She sloshed through ankle-deep filth, ignoring the rats that scampered away from the light. Occasionally, she had to backtrack when she hit a collapse or a flooded section. A few times, she nearly lost her footing on the slippery stones. But at last, she found a spiral staircase carved into the rock, ascending toward the castle's underbelly. Climbing carefully, she emerged into a narrow corridor, the walls lined with old torches that had long burned out. The air was dry here, musty but not wet. She could hear faint footsteps echoing somewhere above. Sliding her dagger free, she moved stealthily until she came to a small wooden door. She cracked it open. A deserted hallway stretched before her, lit by a single guttering torch in a sconce. She recognized the architecture. Red stone, lion motifs carved into the pillars. This was it, the Red Keep. Heart pounding, she slipped back into the corridor, memorizing the path. Once sure of her route, she returned the way she had come, winding through the labyrinth until she emerged into the city. She found the Hound in their makeshift shelter, dozing lightly. When he roused, she told him about the passage. He grunted. Good, let's end this. That evening, they gathered what courage and stamina they had left. Arya led him to the sewer entrance, and they crawled once more through the mire. Neither spoke. The Hound's face was grim, set on his confrontation with the mountain. Arya's thoughts swirled with images of Cersei, recalling every slight and every tragedy. She could already feel the dagger against Cersei's throat, could imagine the last breath escaping her lips. They reached the narrow corridor. Arya pressed her ear to the wooden door. Silence, save for the faint hum of distant voices deeper in the castle. She pushed it open, and they stepped through, hearts pounding. Now they were in the Red Keep, an act of treason that could cost them their lives if discovered. Their footsteps fell lightly on the worn stone floors. They encountered a few guards, but slipped past them by sticking to the shadows. Still, tension thrummed. Every turn of a corner could reveal a patrol. One raised voice, one alarm, and they would be overrun. At length, they reached a junction. Arya gestured to a staircase leading up. That way, she whispered, leads to Cersei's chambers. The Hound nodded to another corridor. That's where the mountain will be. Their eyes met. No farewells were spoken. None were needed. Each of them had come to King's Landing for a singular purpose. So they parted. Arya ascended the staircase, creeping with silent steps. An ornate door barred her way at the top. She picked the lock, easing it open to reveal a side hallway off the main throne room level. Light spilled in from torches mounted in gilded holders. She could hear distant chatter, footsteps, even a laugh. Approaching with caution, she peeked around a corner. 2 Lannister soldiers stood by a set of tall double doors. If memory served, those doors led to an antechamber near Cersei's private quarters. She needed them out of the way. Before she could consider a plan, a muffled crash echoed from somewhere below, followed by shouting. The guards stiffened, eyes turning down the corridor. One barked an order to the other, and they trotted off to investigate. Whatever the Hound was doing, he was drawing attention. Arya seized the opportunity. She sprinted to the double doors, tested them. Unlocked. Slipping inside, she quietly closed them behind her. The antechamber was spacious and lavish, with plush chairs and a table set with wine goblets. A corridor extended beyond, likely leading to Cersei's bedchamber. Arya's senses were on high alert. She heard nothing, saw no one. She drew her dagger, patting across the thick carpet. A second door stood ajar, revealing candlelight within. She pressed herself to the wall, listening. Soft footfalls and the sound of shifting fabric. Then she heard a quiet sigh. She stepped into the doorway, dagger raised. The room was exquisite, draped in crimson and gold. By the window stood Cersei Lannister, hair unbound, dressed in a sleek black gown, a goblet of wine in hand. She turned at the sound of Arya's approach, and her eyes went wide. It took only a heartbeat for Arya to cross the room, pressing the dagger against Cersei's throat. The goblet clattered to the floor, dark wine spilling like blood across the marble. Cersei opened her mouth to scream, but Arya hissed, "Don't." For an instant, neither moved. Arya could feel the pulse at Cersei's throat, wild with fear. She saw the flicker of haughty defiance in the queen's eyes, but there was terror there too. This was the moment Arya had dreamed of. "You know who I am," Arya whispered. Cersei's gaze darted around as though seeking an escape, but Arya pressed closer, the dagger biting into the queen's pale skin. "Arya Stark," Cersei managed, voice tight. "I should have known." Arya felt a tremor of satisfaction that Cersei recognized her. "Yes," she said. "Arya Stark. You destroyed my family. You took my father's head. You sent men to capture and kill me. Your name has been on my list for a long, long time." Cersei tried to mask her fear with disdain. "You think killing me will change anything?" "My soldiers," Arya pressed the dagger harder, and Cersei flinched. "Your soldiers are busy. Or dead. It doesn't matter. This ends now." A faint note of desperation crept into Cersei's voice. "You'll never escape alive." Arya stared into her eyes, recalling the faces of everyone she loved who had suffered because of this woman. Maybe not, Arya said, her voice steady. But your time is done. Remember what you did to my father, to my family. Now it's your turn to beg. Cersei's chest rose and fell rapidly, her lips drawing back in a snarl. I am the queen. You cannot do this. Arya almost laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I killed the Night King. You're just a murderer in fancy clothes. For a heartbeat, Cersei's face contorted with pure hatred. She opened her mouth perhaps to call for help, to scream, to curse Arya's name. But Arya allowed no more words. With a swift stroke, she drew the dagger across Cersei's throat. The queen's eyes went wide. She gasped, choking on blood, clutching at her slashed throat as crimson stained her gown. Her knees buckled. Arya stepped back, watching dispassionately as Cersei collapsed, her breath rattling wetly in her chest. The once mighty lion of Lannister was reduced to a pathetic, bleeding figure on the cold marble floor. Cersei's lips moved, but no sound emerged except for the gurgling of her final breaths. Arya felt a numbness settle over her. She had imagined this moment for years, thinking it would bring her peace. Yet as she watched the light fade from Cersei's eyes, she felt no triumph, only a hollow space where rage and purpose had once burned. She wiped her dagger on a corner of the fallen queen's robe, blood smearing across the fabric. The echoes of footsteps in the corridor startled her. She heard shouts, the clang of steel. The guards had realized an intruder was in the royal quarters. She had only moments to escape. She glanced at Cersei's body one last time, confirming that she was truly gone, then sprinted to the window. Heavy drapes framed it, and beyond lay the city's rooftops. Arya threw the shutters open. The drop was significant, but she had scaled walls before. Footsteps pounded closer. She slid out onto the ledge, gripping the stone sill. A rush of cool night air hit her as she perched there, heart-thudding. Guards burst into the bedchamber, exclaiming at the sight of their lifeless queen. Arya didn't look back. She began a perilous descent, hands and feet searching for footholds in the castle's ornate masonry. The city stretched beneath her, torchlit streets winding between cramped buildings. Inch by inch, she climbed down, every muscle taut, ignoring the scrape of stone against her palms. She dropped onto a lower rooftop, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain flared in her knees, but she pushed on, leaping from one roof to another until she reached a narrow alley. Once on the ground, she blended into the darkness, moving swiftly away from the Red Keep. Sirens of alarm rang out and soldiers stormed the streets. Chaos spread as the word went out, the queen is dead. Arya pressed herself against walls and kept to the shadows. Adrenaline surged, but her mind was oddly quiet. She had done it. She had killed Cersei Lannister. She wanted to feel satisfaction, but all she felt was the emptiness of a completed mission. At last, she reached the outskirts of the city. Avoiding the main gates, she found a small side entrance she and the Hound had passed earlier, one used by tradesmen. A single guard stood there, alert now that alarms were raised. She watched him for a moment, then circled around behind, clambering over a crumbling section of the city wall. Her landing was rough, but she muffled her gasp of pain. Distant horns blared from King's Landing, echoing across the night sky. Arya pressed on, slipping through the darkness until she reached the patch of woods where they had tethered their horses. But the Hound was nowhere to be seen. She felt a pang of worry. Had he fallen to his brother? Had he escaped another way? She checked for signs of struggle and found none. The horses stood where they had left them, restless but intact. She considered waiting for him, but the city was on high alert. She couldn't linger. The memory of Cersei's lifeless eyes flickered in her mind, and she felt a slight tremor run through her fingers. Mounting her horse, she rode away under the cover of night. The road stretched out, and she pressed on at a hard gallop, not knowing where she would go. Perhaps back to the north, perhaps east. The illusions that had driven her for so long, the vendetta that had fueled her, were now realized. She thought of Gendry, of her family, of everything she had lost. And now the final name on her list was crossed out. She was free, and yet that freedom felt terrifying. With no more enemies to hunt, who was she? The path unfurled before her. She felt the wind against her cheeks, heard the thunder of hooves. King's Landing became a distant glow on the horizon. She spared a thought for the Hound. If he lived, maybe he would find her on the road. If he had died, then he had met his end in the only way that ever made sense for him, fighting the monster that shared his blood. Dawn lightened the eastern sky by the time Arya slowed her horse. She dismounted beside a small stream, letting the animal drink. She knelt, washing the sticky blood from her hands. For a long moment, she watched the crimson swirl in the clear water. Then it was gone, carried away by the current. The sun broke over the treetops. The air felt fresh, as though cleansing the land of the old night's sins. Arya stood, droplets of water clinging to her skin. In that moment, she felt a pang of something: grief, relief, a strange bittersweet note. A chapter of her life had ended, but she was still breathing, and the world was wide. She mounted again and rode on, leaving King's Landing far behind. She wondered about Jon and Daenerys, about whether they would even need to lay siege now that Cersei was gone. She wondered about Sansa, about the North. She wondered who would wear the crown, or if it even mattered. As the new day blossomed, Arya Stark urged her horse onward, the wind tangling in her hair. She did not look back at the smoke rising behind her. The list was done. The deed was finished. She was simply Arya, a girl on a long road, with 1,000 possibilities awaiting her. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of something that might have been hope. For a while, Arya simply rode. The world opened before her like an uncharted expanse of possibility, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she had no singular obsession driving her onward. The names on her list, so many of them, were crossed out. The Night King was gone, slain by her hand. Cersei Lannister lay dead in the Red Keep, blood still shining on the marble floor when Arya made her escape into the night. Her vengeance, which had burned like a torch guiding her through the darkness, now flickered uncertainly. She was free of the old, searing hatred, yet that freedom felt strange and hollow. She found herself passing through villages that dotted the Crownlands, each with its own small fields and meager hovels. The air grew warmer the farther she went from King's Landing, and the browning grasses of the road eventually shifted to healthier green shoots in the fields. Occasionally, she encountered farmers who stared at her with wary eyes, unsure if she was some wandering bandit or a soldier from one of the many roaming armies. She kept her hood up, said little, and tried not to draw attention to herself or her horse. Every so often, she glanced back over her shoulder, half expecting to see pursuit. Gold cloaks, Lannister soldiers, or even Daenerys's Unsullied tracking her down for having dispatched the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet no sign came. In truth, King's Landing was probably in too much chaos to send a force after a lone assassin. With Cersei gone, the Iron Throne was vacant, though the city still contained the Golden Company, the remnants of the Lannister Guard, and many terrified nobles. Word would surely spread that the Queen had been murdered in her private chambers, and if the realm had learned anything over the long years of turmoil, it was that a power vacuum rarely stayed unfilled for long. For several days, Arya lived off small purchases of bread and salted fish, exchanging coin she had taken from unfortunate frays long ago or from hidden stashes she'd built up in bravos. She took quiet roads, farm paths. She kept to herself. At night, she slept in shallow forests or next to brooks, letting her horse graze freely while she tried to rest. Sleep rarely came easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the last moments of Cersei's life, the blood gurgling in the Queen's throat, the wide eyes darkening with shock. She felt no regret for the deed, but she did feel untethered. When she finally reached a small market town on the border of the Reach, a place called Buckleford by the locals, she dismounted near a modest stable. She paid a few coppers for her horse to be fed and watered. The stable master, an older woman with calloused hands, barely gave Arya a second glance. She was used to travelers passing through, and something about Arya's demeanor warned her not to pry. Arya found an inn, its sign depicting a half-faded rooster, and entered. The common room smelled of onion soup, stale ale, and sweaty bodies. She chose a seat in a corner, hood still up. A serving girl, hair in a messy braid, approached. "We've got stew if you want it, and bread. Not fresh, but better than nothing." "That will do," Arya said, pitching her voice low. "An ale." The girl nodded and left. Arya let her gaze drift across the patrons. Most were simple folk, farmhands, a few traders with battered wagons, and one thin man wearing the badge of a courier. No one looked particularly threatening or even curious. It was a place for people passing through, people without the luxury of asking too many questions. She could remain invisible here for a day or two. She wondered if that was truly what she wanted. Part of her wanted to see her family again, Sansa, Bran, and Jon, if any of them had survived the southward march or the political tempest that must be raging in Winterfell's wake. Yet something kept her from turning back. Perhaps it was fear. She had been running on vengeance and war for so long, the thought of returning to a normal life felt impossible. She ate her stew in silence. It was thin, mostly cabbage with a few lumps of fatty mutton, but it eased the gnawing in her belly. The ale was sour but drinkable. The inn's murmurs washed over her in a steady drone, people complaining about bandits on the roads, about rising prices, about how the queen was rumored to be dead, though the speaker admitted he wasn't certain. He just heard from a cousin who'd passed through a bigger town that the Lannisters might be finished. Arya kept her expression neutral. That rumor would soon become truth for everyone in the realm. When she finished, she asked the serving girl for a room. The girl eyed her suspiciously. 1 silver stag, she said. Arya handed over the coin, then followed her up a narrow staircase to a cramped chamber with a single cot. It smelled musty, but it was better than sleeping outdoors. She latched the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling. She realized only then how tense she had been. The adrenaline of King's Landing, the kill, the long ride, it was all catching up to her. In the quiet, she sank onto the cot and tried to let her thoughts settle. A pang of longing hit her unexpectedly. She pictured Winterfell, the great hall, the crackling fires, the warmth of Sansa's presence, even if they did not always see eye to eye. She remembered Gendry's smile, the way his eyes lit up. She recalled Jon's strong embrace, the feeling of being safe, if only for a moment, in a cruel world. She wondered if the Hound had lived. If he had, perhaps he was still in that cursed city, among the rubble left by their shared vendetta. A flicker of guilt pulled at her. He had helped her get inside, had helped divert the guards, and she had simply left him there to face the mountain alone. Then again, that had been his choice. She had long understood that Sandor Clegane was not a man to be swayed easily, and his pursuit of his brother was as personal as her own quest for revenge. Night settled over Buckle Ford. Arya lay down on the narrow cot, fully dressed, dagger close at hand. She stared at the stained ceiling, counting the cracks, attempting to slow her racing mind. Sleep did come eventually, though it was fitful and steeped in dreams of blood and vengeance. She woke before sunrise, restless. At dawn, she slipped out of the inn, quietly leading her horse from the stable. She didn't feel like lingering. Her coin purse was lighter than she liked, and the road south beckoned, though she had no specific destination in mind. Perhaps she might ride to Old Town, see the great citadel that Sam had once spoken of. Or maybe she would strike west, toward the coast, and find a ship heading for Bravos. The thought of returning to the Faceless Men's City both intrigued and unsettled her. As she turned onto the main road, she nearly bumped into a traveling cart driven by an old man in a floppy hat. He glared at her. "Watch yourself," she apologized curtly, guiding her horse around the cart. The man's wagon was loaded with barrels, likely full of apples or onions. Arya reined in her annoyance and pressed on. The countryside beyond Buckle Ford was farmland, gentle hills with rows of crops. Men and women in straw hats worked the fields, planting early seeds in the warming soil. Arya remembered the harsh winter in the north, the starving families that had once sought refuge in Winterfell, and she felt a pang of sympathy for these southern farmers who had endured their own nightmares under the constant threat of war. Her road led her past small streams and copses of trees, the sun climbing higher with each passing hour. The weight in her chest did not lighten. She tried to push away the memory of Cersei's final gurgle, but it still echoed in her mind. She knew she had done what she set out to do, yet the hollowness lingered. She was lost in thought when she spotted the shapes of armed riders on the horizon. They were moving in her direction, maybe half a dozen of them. Her instincts flared. She patted her dagger, wishing she had a sword strapped to her saddle. She debated turning off the road, but the land here was open, offering little cover. Instead, she slowed her horse, hoping the riders would pass without incident. As they drew closer, she discerned a banner, a golden rose on a pale green field, House Tyrell's old sigil, though House Tyrell had been crushed by Cersei's forces. Perhaps these were stragglers or bannermen of some lesser-reach house that still used the rose. The men wore mismatched armor, none of it uniform. Likely bandits or a newly formed Sellsword company trying to take advantage of the chaos. Arya tensed as they halted before her. One man, bearded and tall, gave her a long look. "Morning, traveler," he said too smoothly. "Where might you be heading?" She offered a shrug. "Nowhere in particular." He squinted at her face as if trying to see beneath her hood. "Times are dangerous for a lone woman on the road." Another rider snickered. "We could keep you company." He had a scar running across his cheek. Arya forced a neutral expression. "I don't need company." The bearded man laughed softly, though his eyes stayed cold. "What if we insist?" She scanned their posture. Their horses were tired. Their swords looked used but not especially well cared for. She might take 2 or 3 of them by surprise, but 6 would be difficult. Her mind raced with options. She could lie, claim she was a minor noble's daughter and that her father's men were close by. But something told her these men wouldn't care about rank or station. "I'm Arya." She spoke quietly, hoping none recognized the name Stark or associated it with the stories of the Night King's slayer. She wasn't sure how wide that tale had spread. "I've been fighting my whole life. Leave me be and I'll spare you the trouble." One man guffawed. "Look at that, she's threatening us." Arya felt the hush of potential violence settling. She breathed in, her senses sharpening. She mentally noted the positions of each rider. If they pressed, she'd have to strike fast. Before anyone could move, a voice called from behind the riders. "What's all this then?" Arya craned her neck. Another group of riders approached, these with a more unified appearance, armor emblazoned with a gold lion's head. Lannister men. At least 8 of them. She tensed again, a jolt of fear twisting her stomach. If they suspected who she was, she'd have an entire squad of lion-helmed soldiers on her heels. She forced her face to remain blank, her hand casually near her reins. She was poised to flee if needed. The lead Lannister soldier, a man with stubble on his jaw and a hard glint in his eye, surveyed the situation. He glanced at Arya, then at the men with the rose banner. "You fine fellows giving this traveler trouble?" The bearded man scowled. "She's not your business." A thin smile touched the Lannisters' lips. "Roads near King's Landing and the Reach are under the watch of our patrols. My Lord Commander won't like hearing of bandits harassing folk." Arya watched warily. The men with the rose banner were tough, but they seemed to realize they were outnumbered. Their leader spat. "We're no bandits. We serve House Meadows." He gestured to their rose banner. "We were just passing the time with this girl." The Lannister soldier's smile did not fade. "Then ride on." A tense silence loomed. Arya braced herself to bolt or fight, whichever came first. The bearded man finally kicked his horse forward. "I will ride on." He shot Arya a glare, as if memorizing her face. One by one, the men followed, their hostility lingering in the air. When they were gone, the Lannister soldier turned his horse to face her. His men fanned out, not quite forming a circle, but clearly watchful. "You all right?" She dipped her head slightly, careful to keep her face partially hidden beneath her hood. "Yes. Thank you." "Where are you headed?" She forced a casual shrug. "South, maybe Old Town. Just looking for work." He studied her for a moment. "The roads aren't safe. If I were you, I'd join a caravan or find a bigger party. There are plenty of outlaws prowling around, especially now that, well, the throne is in question." Arya nodded as if in agreement. "I'll manage." He gave her a final measuring look. "Suit yourself. Good luck then." He flicked the reins and the Lannister patrol continued northward. Arya exhaled. She could feel her heart hammering. That had been too close. If he'd recognized her, if any of them knew who she was, there would have been blood. She was in no mood for a pitched fight, not so soon after King's Landing. Urging her horse forward, she cantered down the road in the opposite direction, leaving the incident behind. For the next few days, she encountered no further trouble. The farmland started to transition into gently rolling countryside as she angled southwest. She wasn't entirely sure why she chose that direction. Maybe curiosity, maybe an unconscious desire to see more of the Reach's famed beauty, or maybe she just wanted to keep moving. Each mile put her farther from the Red Keep and the memories of Cersei's final moments. But no matter how far she rode, the memory clung to her like a second shadow. One afternoon, she found herself near a shallow river. The sun was high and hot, and the horse was lathered in sweat. Arya decided to pause in the shade of a willow tree to let both of them rest. She let the horse drink while she dipped her hands into the cool water, splashing it over her face. Birdsong drifted through the branches. She took a deep breath, letting the calm of nature settle over her. She heard a noise, hooves on the far bank. Quickly, she crouched behind the trunk, scanning for a threat. But when the figure came into view, her eyes widened. It was the hound. leading a limping horse, his armor dusty and stained. Her heart skipped a beat, so he had survived. She watched him for a moment, unsure whether to reveal herself. He tied his horse to a low branch on the other side and knelt by the water, splashing it over his face much as she had done. He looked exhausted, shoulders sagging. A pang of empathy moved through her. They had been on separate but equally dangerous missions, and it seemed both had come out the other side barely. She rose from her cover, walking quietly along the riverbank until she was within earshot. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she called. The hound spun, hand on the hilt of his sword, eyes wild for a moment. Then recognition set in. "Bloody hell, girl. Nearly gave me a heart attack." He let go of the sword and stood straighter, though it looked like it cost him effort. He stared at her across the water. "You're alive, then?" "I could say the same for you," she replied. She searched his face for signs of injury. His left arm was bandaged, and there was dried blood caked on his right gauntlet. A bruise darkened one side of his jaw, and his stance was off, as though his ribs were hurting him. "You found your brother?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "Oh, I found him. Or he found me. Bastard was waiting in the red keep with that freak of a maester." He spat into the river. "We fought, if you can call it that." He was so far gone, hardly more than a walking corpse. Didn't even seem to feel pain. Arya recalled the hulking shape of Gregor Clegane, what rumors called the Mountain, brought back from the brink of death by Qyburn's dark experiments. "You won?" she asked softly. He gave a grim nod. "I suppose I did. Don't remember much. There was fire, rubble. I think the whole damn castle was falling apart. Lost my sword. Ended up wrestling him into a pit of flames. For a while, I thought I'd burn along with him." His eyes flicked up, meeting hers. "But I managed to crawl out before the floor collapsed entirely. Don't ask me how. I lost track of everything after that. Just tried to get away. Find a horse. Next thing I knew, I was miles from the city, bleeding like a stuck pig." Arya's chest tightened. She felt relief that the hound was alive, and also guilt that she'd left him. But she knew they had both accepted the risks. "I finished what I came to do," she said quietly. He snorted. "So that's it, then. Cersei's gone." "Yes," Arya replied. She didn't elaborate. She didn't want to describe the exact moment of the kill or how it made her feel. The hound regarded her for a long moment. The realm's going to be in an uproar for months, maybe years, with her gone. Daenerys will likely swoop in and try to claim what's left unless someone else has a mind to sit the throne first. Arya nodded. "I don't plan to stick around for any of it." The water gurgled between them. A bird flitted overhead. After a pause, the hound jerked his head toward the shallow part of the river. "Come on across, girl. Not like I'm going to gut you." She urged her horse to ford the stream, stepping carefully on the mossy stones beneath the water. When she reached his side, she saw how truly worn he looked. There were fresh scars and old wounds reopened. He stared at her horse, then at her. "You heading somewhere specific, or just wandering?" "Wandering," she admitted. He grunted. "Same here. Figured I might head up to the Riverlands, see if there's anything worth doing." Not sure why. The mention of the Riverlands brought back memories of their old journey together back when she was a child escaping the War of the Five Kings. So much had changed since then. Yet here they were, two killers without a war to fight or a master to serve. A sudden thought tugged at Arya. Did she even want to go back to Winterfell? Would Sansa or Jon see her the same way if they knew everything she had done? As if sensing her turmoil, the hound spoke, voice quieter than usual. "You got no more names, do you?" She looked away. "No. None that matter." He nodded. "Then you're free, in a way. I wouldn't know how that feels." It surprised her to hear him talk of freedom, especially since he had lived much of his life under the heel of the Lannisters or under the weight of his own hatred for his brother. "What about you?" she asked. "The mountain is gone. Do you have anything left to do?" He huffed a wry laugh. "Live, I suppose. Or try to." Then his gaze shifted to her bandaged arm, noticing a faint red stain where a scab had broken. "You hurt." "Just a scratch from the battle." She shrugged, though it stung. "I've had worse." The hound surveyed the horizon. "We can ride together a ways, if you like. Might be safer. There are bandits out there. Kingslayers, Queenslayers, who knows, everyone's looking for a piece of something." his mouth twisted in a grim half-smile. Arya felt an odd comfort in his presence, though she would never have admitted it openly. They had shared a bond forged in blood and necessity, and in some strange way it felt reassuring not to be alone. She nodded. All right? They traveled side by side from that day forward, taking slow roads through the Reach. The lush fields were gradually recovering from the devastation caused by Cersei's order to burn the food stores before the battle against Daenerys's forces months earlier. People in small hamlets had begun planting again, though the scars of war still showed. At times, villagers shied away from the Hound's scarred visage or from Arya's cold stare. But often, simple folks were too tired or hungry to ask many questions of passing strangers. They slept under the stars when they could, using the meager coin they had left only when absolutely necessary. On the nights they did make camp, Arya sometimes caught herself watching the sky, thinking of dragons. She wondered if Daenerys and her army had marched on King's Landing by now, if they had found the city in chaos. She pictured the Iron Throne vacant, the spidery network of power shifting daily as different lords and ladies plotted their next moves. Tyrion Lannister would have his hands full trying to negotiate a peaceful transition. If that was even possible. The Hound, for his part, rarely spoke of the future. Once, as they warmed themselves by a small fire near an apple orchard, he stared at the flames and said, "What do you do? After you've killed your demon?" Arya poked at the embers with a stick. "You find a new life," he scoffed. Easier said than done. They fell into a companionable silence. Arya found that she no longer bristled at his presence the way she once had. There was a sort of camaraderie in their shared awareness that violence did not solve every problem, but it had solved theirs. Days turned to weeks. The land grew greener, warmer. They skirted the edges of what was once Highgarden's domain. Rumors abounded that Euron Greyjoy had gone missing, that Daenerys Targaryen had set up a temporary seat of power in the Red Keep, that Jon Snow was named king in the north once more, and that armies were repositioning across the realm as lords tried to guess the shape of the new order. One afternoon, they came upon a small group of refugees, families with children, pushing carts or carrying bundles on their backs. They looked weary, half-starved. The Hound grimaced at the sight, and Arya recalled the horrors she had witnessed during the War of the Five Kings. They approached cautiously, not wanting to alarm the travelers. A woman with a baby in her arms gave them a haunted look. "You're not bandits, are you?" "No," Arya said simply. The Hound reached into his saddlebag and took out a half-loaf of stale bread. "Here," he muttered, tossing it to the woman. "That's all we can spare." She caught it, eyes filling with gratitude. Another man, a farmer by the looks of him, inclined his head. "Bless you both. Where are you headed?" "No place in particular," the Hound replied. The farmer nodded. "You might want to avoid the main roads. A band calling themselves the Firehands has been raiding travelers near Stonebridge. They fly no banners, but rumor says they used to be part of the Golden Company." Arya offered a grimace. "We'll keep that in mind." They parted ways, leaving the refugees to continue their slow trek. Arya felt a pull of guilt that she couldn't do more, but she reminded herself that she was not a hero of the realm, not a queen or a knight sworn to protect the innocent. She was just Arya Stark, or maybe just Arya. Yet some small part of her yearned to help, to stop the suffering. Perhaps that was a memory of who she had been before she lost herself in the House of Black and White. That night, as they camped in a copse of oak trees, she found herself telling the Hound about her childhood memories in Winterfell, chasing cats, shooting arrows with Bran and Robb, the feasts Ned Stark would host in the Great Hall. She spoke haltingly, as if uncertain these were truly her memories or someone else's. He listened in uncharacteristic silence, occasionally grunting when she paused. "Sounds like a nice life," he said at length, rubbing his scarred face. "Compared to mine, anyway." Arya knew some of his story, how his brother had burned him as a child, the cruelty he had endured under House Clegane, and later, Joffrey's torment. They both had scars that went deeper than flesh. In the morning, they pressed on. They had no real destination, yet they found themselves drifting north, perhaps drawn by the magnetic pull of the known. The Riverlands were still recovering from years of conflict. Broken towers and burned-out villages dotted the landscape. But the grass was green, the rivers full of fish, and the nights bore a gentle summer wind that rattled the leaves. One evening, they arrived at a village perched on the edge of a wide river. A ferry crossed it, operated by a handful of old men who charged a copper for each crossing. The village, called Swanford by the battered sign, seemed peaceful enough. Farmers, fishers, and a single small tavern that doubled as a gathering hall. The hound was eager for ale, so Arya followed him inside. The tavern was cramped, with plain benches and a low ceiling, but it offered hot stew and something that passed for bread. A small fire crackled in a hearth. The talk among the locals was subdued, mostly about fishing catches and the best ways to reinforce the ferry. But near the hearth, a man with a scraggly beard and ink-stained fingers was speaking in a louder voice to a group of listeners. "I tell you," he said, "the dragons have taken King's Landing. The silver-haired queen sits on the Iron Throne, they say. She's calling herself Daenerys Stormborn, first of her name, and all that. And who's going to stand against her now?" An older man spat on the floor. "Could be someone else with a better claim. Heard tell there's a Targaryen lad up north, Aegon something or other." "That's all rumors," the bearded man retorted. "Besides, the city was already in chaos. The queen," he paused dramatically, "was found murdered in her own bedchamber. Throat slit, blood everywhere. I got it on good authority from a friend who trades in the city. Says half the gold cloaks were searching for an assassin. Some say it was a faceless man from Bravos, others say it was a revenge killing by House Martell. No one knows." Arya kept her face neutral, though her stomach clenched at the memory. The man continued, "The Lannister cause is done, if you ask me. No one left but a few scattered loyalists." Someone else chimed in, "What of the Starks in the north?" "They say the Starks are strong again," the bearded man answered. "The Lady of Winterfell runs things up there, but the king in the north, who also might be a Targaryen, rode south with Daenerys. Now they're in King's Landing together, or so the rumor goes." The group broke into speculation about how the realm would reorganize, who would side with which new power, and whether the next winter would be harsh. Arya exchanged a glance with the hound, who sipped his ale. She could read his thoughts. The world kept spinning, alliances shifted, and those like them, two killers on the fringes, merely watched from the outside. They took a table in a corner, ordering stew and more ale. Arya's appetite was lukewarm, but she forced herself to eat. The hound tore into his food with mechanical fervor, as if it were a chore to be done. Nearby, a cluster of local farmers eyed the hound's scars, but no one dared approach them. After a while, the door opened, letting in a gust of cooler air. Arya glanced up, expecting some local come to wet his throat. Instead, she saw a tall woman in battered armor, cloak drawn, stepping inside with a cautious gaze. Brienne of Tarth. Arya's heart jolted. She recognized the shining hair, the strong jaw, and that same presence of quiet determination. Brienne scanned the room and found Arya's eyes almost immediately. Surprise flickered across her face. She took a step forward as though uncertain how to proceed. Arya stood, ignoring the hound's muttered oath. She and Brienne had trained together at Winterfell, forging a bond of respect. She recalled the day she had bested the towering woman with a clever trick reminiscent of how she had defeated the Night King. The memory brought a slight smile to her lips. "Lady Brienne," Arya greeted. Brienne approached slowly, removing her cloak. She looked travel-worn. Her armor bore the sigil of House Stark, Awa. Elef's head freshly painted over older markings. "Arya," she said, sounding both relieved and perplexed. "I've been looking for you." A hush fell around them as onlookers realized this might be an important conversation. The hound grumbled under his breath. Arya glanced at him, then back to Brienne. "Looking for me? Why?" Brienne's gaze flicked to the hound. She offered him a curt nod. They had a complicated history. Then she turned her attention back to Arya. "Jon and Sansa have been searching for you ever since Winterfell. They wanted to make sure you were all right. After the battle with the Night King, you vanished. And then we heard rumors about King's Landing. Terrible rumors." Arya understood the unspoken question. "Did you do it?" But Brienne did not voice the accusation. She only waited. Arya felt a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty. Brienne was here as a representative of her family, or perhaps as a friend. "I'm all right," Arya finally replied. "I just had things to do." Brienne's eyes softened. "I've been tasked with returning you to Winterfell if you're willing to come." Sansa's worried. "Jon's in King's Landing now, but he also asked for news of you." Arya hesitated. She had spent so long resisting the notion of going back, not feeling ready to face the weight of her past and the judgments of her kin. Yet something in Brienne's voice, the genuine care, chipped away at her defenses. "Winterfell," she murmured. "Is Sansa all right?" Brienne nodded. "She's well. The North has been spared further battles, at least for now. But with Daenerys' ascendancy in King's Landing, things are uncertain. Sansa feels you might have a voice in what happens next if you choose." Arya thought about it, her mind whirling. Did she have a place in shaping the realm's future? Once, that might have felt laughable. But she had slain the Night King, killed the queen who had sat on the Iron Throne, and defied death more times than she could count. Perhaps her voice mattered more than she realized. She glanced at the Hound, who was watching her with an inscrutable expression. "And if I don't want to go back?" Brienne sighed. "That's your choice. I'm not here to force you. But your family loves you. They want you to come home." Arya's heart tightened at the word home. Winterfell, with its old gray stones and towering walls. The godwood where she had prayed. The crypts where her ancestors rested. She pictured Sansa, poised and regal, ruling with a careful hand. Bran, distant and all-knowing as the three-eyed raven. Jon, torn by duty and lineage, forging alliances to protect the living. They were her family, fractured but still hers. The hush in the tavern lingered. Finally, Arya nodded. "All right, I'll come with you." The Hound let out a grunt, pushing aside his empty bowl. "Looks like our road ends here, then." She turned to him. "You could come, if you want. The North might be less chaotic than the South right now." A wry half-smile twisted his lips. "The North hates the likes of me. But you're not the only one who got an invitation once upon a time." He shrugged, as though considering. "Might be I'll ride up there anyway. Nowhere else to go." Brienne looked between them, clearly uncertain about the Hound's presence. But she said nothing against it. "We should rest tonight, then head out at first light. It's a long journey to Winterfell." They agreed. The rest of the evening was spent in subdued conversation. Brienne explained that she had been sent south by Sansa to find Arya months ago, following rumors that Arya had traveled near the Trident. Brienne had gleaned scraps of information about a short, fierce girl traveling with a tall, scarred man, but the trail had gone cold for a time. Only recently had she heard a fresh report from a ferryman that matched Arya's description. That night, Arya shared a small, cramped room with Brienne while the Hound slept in the stables, half by choice, half because no one in the tavern felt comfortable offering him a bed. It felt strange to have Brienne's presence so close. This woman was a reminder of Winterfell, of duty, of everything Arya had thought she left behind. Yet a part of her felt a quiet relief not to be running from her past anymore. At dawn, they set out. Brienne had her own mare, and Arya had her sturdy horse. The Hound rode behind, as though reluctant to join them outright, but equally reluctant to depart. The odd trio wove through the riverlands, occasionally crossing paths with scattered soldiers or refugees. They steered clear of large forces, uncertain of alliances. When they camped, Brienne practiced sword forms while Arya watched, sometimes joining in for a brief spar. The Hound merely grumbled, but Arya could see a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes for the knight's skill. In time, the weather turned colder. The winds carried the crisp bite of the north. They forded the Twins, though crossing was easier now that House Frey had been decimated and the castle was under new management, sworn to House Stark. Arya felt a grim satisfaction remembering how she had ended the Frey's tyranny, but she spoke none of those details to Brienne. They continued onward, passing the spot where Arya had once reconnected with her dire wolf, Nymeria, though the pack was nowhere in sight this time. At last, they climbed the final stretch of road to Winterfell. The ancient castle appeared on the horizon, its walls as familiar as a heartbeat. Arya felt her throat tighten. Memories surged, her father at the gate, her brothers practicing archery in the yard, the first time she had left this place so many years ago. The gates opened for them. The courtyard bustled with activity, blacksmiths hammering, stable hands leading horses, guards patrolling. At first, no one seemed to notice Arya. Then a young guard recognized Brienne, and his gaze slid to Arya. His eyes went wide. "Lady Arya?" he stammered. Arya swallowed, suddenly self-conscious. "Just Arya is fine." He bowed awkwardly, then signaled to another guard. The word spread like a brush fire through the courtyard. "Arya Stark has returned." Workers paused their tasks to stare, half in wonder, half in curiosity. Arya could feel the weight of so many eyes. She dismounted, patting her horse's flank, and a stable hand rushed forward to take the reins. Brienne inclined her head toward the steps leading into the castle. "Sansa should be inside. I'll let her know we've arrived." The Hound swung down from his horse as well. Several onlookers gaped at his burned face, his towering form. Some whispered in hushed tones, but no one dared challenge him. He gave Arya a sidelong look, almost asking for permission. She gave a slight nod, and together they followed Brienne into the great hall. The hall was alive with the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. Guards and servants bustled about. At the far end, On a modest wooden chair draped with direwolf banners, sat Sansa Stark. She wore a dark gown trimmed with fur, her red hair braided and pinned. Her posture was regal yet measured, as though the weight of leadership had become second nature. She was in conversation with Maester Wolkan and a council of northern lords. Small folk were lined up, presenting requests or grievances. When Sansa spotted Brienne, then Arya, she froze mid-sentence. Her eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, the entire hall seemed to pause. Then, in a rush, she stood and crossed the room, ignoring the startled looks of the lords. Arya met her halfway, and Sansa embraced her fiercely, the warmth of sisterly affection dissolving the tension. Arya closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of Winterfell. For that moment, she was a child again, safe at home. "Arya," Sansa whispered, pulling back just enough to study her face. "You came back." Arya managed a small, trembling smile. "I did." Sansa's gaze flicked to the Hound, who stood a short distance away, looking uncomfortable under the watchful stares of the northern men. Her mouth tightened in a guarded line, but she nodded politely. "Thank you for bringing my sister home safely," she said to Brienne and, by extension, the Hound. Brienne dipped her head. The Hound just grunted. Sansa turned back to Arya. "We have so much to discuss, but first come. You must be hungry, tired. There's a room prepared for you." Arya felt overwhelmed by the normalcy of Sansa's hospitality. She caught a glimpse of the Maester and a few northern lords, who were undoubtedly curious about the returning Stark girl. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." Sansa, with her usual grace, made a brief apology to the gathered petitioners. "My lords, I'll resume this meeting shortly. Please give me a few moments with my sister." The lords bowed or nodded, stepping aside as Sansa guided Arya toward one of the side corridors. They walked in silence at first, the torchlit hallways of Winterfell enveloping them. Finally, Sansa said softly, "I was worried you'd never come back, especially when we heard rumors you'd gone to King's Landing." Arya shrugged. "I did. Had unfinished business." Sansa's expression grew pained. "I've heard talk that Cersei was killed, that it might have been you." She studied Arya's face carefully. Arya did not confirm or deny, but her silence spoke volumes. Sansa exhaled. "I see." They came to a small sitting room near Sansa's private chambers. A fire crackled in the hearth, a table laid with bread, cheese, and fruit. As soon as the door closed behind them, Sansa took Arya's hands. "Tell me everything, or tell me nothing, if that's what you need. I'm just so glad you're here." Arya's throat felt tight. She didn't know where to begin. The weight of her kills, her transformations, the House of Black and White, the close calls with death, they formed a tangled knot inside her. Yet the sincerity in Sansa's eyes made her want to open up, at least partially. "I killed her," Arya admitted, voice low. "Cersei. After we defeated the Night King, I couldn't let her go unpunished. I went south and found a way into the Red Keep." Sansa's eyes filled with sadness rather than shock. "I thought as much. The realm is in an uproar. Daenerys has taken the city now, but it's not been peaceful. There were riots, confusion. Half the nobles fled, not knowing who was truly in power. Tyrion wrote me a letter saying that Daenerys sits on the Iron Throne, but it's tenuous. Jon is there trying to negotiate a better outcome for the North. He wanted me to come, but I couldn't leave Winterfell undefended." Arya sank into a chair by the fire. The warmth reminded her of simpler times. "Do you trust Daenerys?" Sansa's lips pursed. "I trust Jon, and I trust Tyrion. Somewhat. Daenerys, she wants what she believes is hers by right. At least she helped us defeat the White Walkers. But I don't know how she'll rule now that her biggest enemies are gone." Arya thought of the charred remains of King's Landing, the stories of how Daenerys had once burned the Lannister supply train. She's not the same as her father, but Targaryens can be unpredictable. Sansa nodded. Still, Jon believes in her, and so, for now, the North will abide. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the crackle of the fire fill the room. Then Sansa squeezed Arya's hand gently. "What about you?" Are you staying? Arya hadn't fully decided. The part of her that craved wanderlust was strong. She had seen so much of the world, learned so many skills. Another part of her recognized that her family, her roots, and any possibility of peace lay here. I don't know, she answered softly. I've changed, Sansa. I'm not who I was. A tender expression crossed Sansa's features. None of us are, but you're still a Stark. A knock sounded at the door, and a maidservant poked her head in. My lady, the lords are asking if... Oh, forgive me. She blushed at interrupting. They wondered if you'd be returning soon. Sansa rose, smoothing her skirts. I have responsibilities now. You should rest. We'll talk more later. Arya nodded, grateful for the reprieve. After Sansa left, she picked at the bread and cheese, though her appetite was faint. She felt the castle around her, whispers of her past in every corridor, the ghosts of her family in every stone. A part of her welcomed the familiarity, another part chafed at it, like a bird hesitating to enter a cage it once called home. She spent her first night in Winterfell lying awake, listening to the wind batter the walls outside. Memories surfaced of the times she had crawled into Jon's bed for comfort during storms, the hush of his reassuring voice. She remembered the day she had hidden in the crypts, half believing the statues of her ancestors might come to life. Now, she had faced things far more terrifying than old ghosts. She tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop whirling. The next few days passed in a blur. Sansa insisted on throwing a small feast in Arya's honor, an intimate gathering with the major northern lords who were present. The Hound made an uncomfortable appearance, gulping down ale and scowling at the well-meaning toasts. Brienne attended, standing protectively near Sansa. Arya found herself forced into polite conversation with grizzled bannermen who praised her for slaying the Night King, while also eyeing her warily, as if half expecting a demonstration of her lethal skills. She endured the feast as best she could, grateful when it finally ended. In the days that followed, Sansa tried to include Arya in councils about trade, the distribution of winter stores, and the management of new farmland. Arya attended a few, but her mind drifted. These practicalities seemed so distant from the life she had led, from the identity she had forged. She had never had a talent for politics. One early morning, restless and seeking some form of release, she headed to the courtyard where the masters-at-arms trained young soldiers. She requested a sparring partner, ignoring their nervous stares. One young guard, brash enough to think he could impress the Lady of Winterfell's sister, stepped forward with a wooden sword. Arya told him to fetch steel. They squared off in the yard. A light snow dusted the stones underfoot. A small crowd gathered, curious to see how this would go. Arya let her body relax, recalling the fluid steps of Braavosi water dancing, the lethal quickness the faceless men had honed in her. The guard swung tentatively at first, uncertain how hard to strike. Arya dodged easily, slipping past him. When he tried again, she swept his legs out from under him and placed her steel at his throat before he could blink. He blinked up at her, stunned. A ripple of whispers spread among the watchers. Arya backed away, letting him scramble to his feet. His cheeks burned with embarrassment, but he bowed to her, acknowledging her skill. In that moment, she saw a flicker of awe in the crowd. Some recognized that the stories of Arya Stark's prowess were not just tall tales. She continued practicing until her muscles hummed with exertion. The exercise was a balm, momentarily silencing her thoughts. That night, she lingered in the Godswood, gazing at the heart tree. The carved face in the trunk bled red sap as it had for centuries. She knelt on the snow, letting the quiet of the sacred space wash over her. Footsteps crunched behind her. She glanced back, seeing Sansa approach with measured steps. Sansa joined her by the tree, folding her hands together, her breath pluming in the cold air. For a time, neither spoke. Then Sansa said, I know this isn't easy for you. Being here. Arya kept her eyes on the heart tree. I don't know how to belong in a place that feels both like home and a memory. Sansa nodded. After everything I went through, I felt the same at first. But in time, I found purpose in caring for our people. The North needed a Stark in Winterfell. I had no choice but to become that. Arya thought about her own path. She had always been the one who slipped away from ladylike duties, who ran after adventure. Now she had taken more lives than she could count, even killed the greatest threats to the realm. Could she settle into a quieter role? She wasn't sure. Sansa glanced at her. There's going to be a meeting soon. A great council in King's Landing, or so Tyrion writes. They want to shape the future of the 7 kingdoms, or 6, or however many remain loyal to the Iron Throne. Jon is urging for a new structure, maybe more independence for the North. Tyrion believes a compromise can be found. They've asked me to come, or to send a representative. Arya raised her eyebrows. You would go. Sansa shrugged, her fur mantle shifting. It might be necessary, but traveling all the way to King's Landing again. I have doubts. If war breaks out, who will defend the North? The other lords trust me to stay here. But if I don't go, then who speaks for us? Arya understood the dilemma. Winterfell could not be left leaderless, not after so many crises. On the other hand, refusing the invitation might isolate them from the realm's decisions. Sansa turned her gaze to Arya. Would you go in my place? It's a lot to ask, I know. But you've been to King's Landing, you know how to navigate that viper's nest. And you'd have as much right as any to speak for House Stark. Arya stared at her sister, taken aback. The idea of returning to King's Landing so soon after killing Cersei filled her with a queasy dread. But she also felt a stirring, a sense that perhaps her unique experiences made her the right person for the task. She had no love for the politics of the capital, but she could protect herself, and she could stand up for the North if needed. You trust me with that? Sansa's lips curved in a small, sad smile. You're my sister, and the realm respects you or fears you or both. You've proven you can handle yourself among enemies. I can't think of anyone better to ensure our interests are heard. Arya exhaled slowly. She pictured the throne room, the blood on her dagger, the chaos of the city. The thought of walking those halls again churned her stomach, yet she recognized the importance of the mission. If that's what you need, she said softly, I'll do it. Sansa reached out and squeezed Arya's hand. Thank you. In the following days, preparations were made for the journey south. Arya found herself surprisingly calm about it. Perhaps this was what she needed, a purpose, something beyond her personal vengeance. If she was going to remain in Westeros, maybe she could at least try to shape it for the better. The Hound, upon hearing of the plan, snorted, You're bloody mad going back there. But fine. I'll come, keep you from getting yourself killed in some alley. She almost smiled. She suspected he had grown tired of Winterfell's polite stares and wanted an excuse to leave. He packed his belongings, which were few, and made ready. Brienne decided to remain at Winterfell, loyal to Sansa's side. But Sansa offered Arya a small escort, 10 loyal guards who had proven themselves. Arya declined at first, preferring to travel light, but Sansa insisted. You're representing House Stark. Give the realm a show of our strength. So it was that Arya left Winterfell again, this time with a retinue of armed northerners who wore the dire wolf proudly on their cloaks. The Hound rode at her side, casting baleful looks at the men. She didn't mind the escort as much as she had expected. They were decent fighters, skilled archers, and all sworn to protect a Stark. They didn't pester her with chatter, seeming to sense her preference for quiet. The roads south were still dotted with travelers, some heading to King's Landing for the rumored Great Council, others fleeing potential conflict, and yet more chastened. Gee, the uncertain opportunities that war-torn regions offered. Every night, Arya's party made camp off the main roads, taking turns standing watch. Word spread that the Lady Arya Stark of Winterfell was traveling. The presence of the Hound, infamous in his own right, added to the group's mystique. Few dared challenge them. As they drew closer to the capital, Arya felt tension coil in her gut. The last time she had been here, she'd slit the throat of the queen. She wondered how the city had changed in the intervening weeks. The countryside showed signs of scarring, burned fields, abandoned farms, but also small pockets of recovery. Eventually, they spied the distant outline of King's Landing's walls, the Red Keep perched high as if in defiance of the realm's turmoil. Arya paused on a hill overlooking the city, her escort halting behind her. She recalled riding away under the cover of darkness, Cersei's blood drying on her dagger. Now she was returning in daylight as a Stark envoy. The Hound rode up beside her. You sure about this? She steadied herself. No, but here we are. They continued down the winding road to the gates. Lannister banners were scarce, replaced by Targaryen flags, a 3-headed dragon on a black field fluttering from the ramparts. Unsullied soldiers manned the gates alongside remnants of the city watch. A long line of travelers waited to enter, their belongings piled on carts. The gates stood wide, but the guards were checking each group carefully. Arya and her retinue approached. One Unsullied stepped forward, spear upright. He eyed the dire wolf sigils on their cloaks. Purpose, he asked in clipped common tongue. Arya lifted her chin. I am Arya Stark, here for the Great Council. The Unsullied's expression did not change, but he glanced at the Hound, then back at Arya. He motioned to a scribe who stepped up to confirm names against a list. The scribe, a thin man with a quill behind his ear, bowed slightly. We were told to expect emissaries from the north. Please enter. You'll be directed to accommodations in the Red Keep. The gates swung open and Arya led her party inside. The city beyond was both familiar and changed. Rubble from past skirmishes was cleared, but soot stains marred many buildings. The people moved through the streets with caution as if waiting for another sudden shift in power. Targaryen banners dangled from poles and hung across thoroughfares. Public criers announced, "All hail Daenerys, Queen of the Undulls and the First Men," but the crowd's response was tepid at best. Arya guided her horse down the main avenue, the Hound and her guards flanking her. She noticed fresh graffiti scrawled on walls, messages like "Dragon Queen" or "Fire and Blood," alongside other, more rebellious slogans. Fear simmered beneath the surface of the city, but so did curiosity. Whispers followed them as they passed. "It's the Stark girl," someone murmured. "She killed the Night King," another whispered. Eventually, they reached the Red Keep, its gates manned by Unsullied as well. Inside the courtyard, an attendant showed them to stables and directed Arya to the royal apartments where visiting dignitaries were being housed. She gave her horse's reins to a stable boy, patting the animal's neck. The Hound dismounted with a grunt, rolling his shoulders as though in discomfort. He eyed the keep's towering walls. "Never thought I'd be back here, not alive anyway." Arya nodded. Her own memories of this place, the corridors, the hidden passages, flooded her mind. She led the way into a grand hall where a Targaryen official in red and black robes offered them rooms and explained that the Great Council would convene in 2 days. Arya responded curtly, exhausted from the journey and the swirl of emotions. Their quarters were more lavish than Arya would have liked. The room assigned to her boasted a canopied bed, silk drapes, and polished floors. A decanter of wine awaited on a table along with fresh fruit. She set down her pack, unbuckled her belt with its dagger sheath, and took a moment to breathe. She was here, in the heart of the city she had once fled, the city where she had taken the most important life on her list. Now she was to parley with the new regime. A quiet knock at the door startled her. She opened it to reveal a slim figure with mismatched eyes, Ser Davos Seaworth. The old smuggler-turned-knight wore a gray cloak, his hair more silver than she remembered. He gave her a warm, fatherly smile. "Arya Stark, I was hoping I'd see you." Surprise flickered in her chest. "Ser Davos? I heard you were an advisor to Jon and Daenerys now." He dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I'm doing what I can. Jon is here, by the way, though he's in a meeting with the Queen. He'll be glad you've arrived. He's been worried." Arya glanced at the corridor, half expecting Jon to materialize. "How is he?" Davos sighed gently. "Tired, torn. Trying to keep the peace. Daenerys, well, she's queen, and she wants the realm to acknowledge it. There are disagreements about how that should look. Jon's stuck in the middle of it all." Arya felt a pang of sympathy for Jon. He had always carried the realm's burdens on his shoulders. "I'll talk to him soon." "Good." Davos studied her face. "You've been through a lot, I imagine. The city is still uneasy after the shift in power. Tread carefully. Not everyone is pleased the North is here, and there are plenty of folk who suspect the Starks had a hand in Cersei's demise." "I don't suppose you know anything about that." Arya met his gaze evenly. She reaped what she sowed. A flicker of understanding crossed his features. "I well said. I won't pry. Just watch your back. There are those who'd love to see you fall." Arya inclined her head in thanks. Davos left, and she closed the door, leaning against it. The mention of Cersei's murder reminded her that the city might still be hunting for the culprit even if Daenerys had seized the throne. She had to remain vigilant. A short while later, she stepped into the hallway, deciding to explore the keep on her own terms. The halls felt both familiar and foreign. Tapestries bearing Targaryen sigils replaced the old Lannister lions. The red stone walls remained the same, the dark arches, the hidden nooks. She passed a few Unsullied guards who stood motionless, spears in hand. Servants scurried by, bowing their heads. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Grey Worm, commander of the Unsullied. He stood tall, his face impassive. Recognition flashed in his eyes. She remembered him from Winterfell on the eve of the battle against the dead. They had fought on the same side then. Now, they exchanged polite nods, but attention hovered. He gestured down the hallway. "The council room is that way. The Queen is occupied, but you may wait if you wish." Arya shook her head. "I'll find my brother later." "Thank you." Grey Worm inclined his head in a curt salute and continued on his way. Arya let out a breath, realizing just how many new powers were at play in the keep. The Unsullied were loyal to Daenerys alone, and she had to remember that in every interaction. Wandering further, she eventually reached a private balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, ships bearing Targaryen sails anchored in the harbor. The last time she had looked upon this bay, she'd been an unseen shadow slipping out of the city. Now she stood in the open, a representative of the North. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she turned, seeing a figure she recognized instantly, Jon Snow. He paused, features etched with astonishment. Then relief and warmth spread across his face. Arya? She felt a sudden rush of emotion. It had been so long since they'd been together in any true sense. She stepped forward and he embraced her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders in that familiar, protective way. She rested her forehead briefly against his chest, inhaling the scent of leather and a hint of northern pine. You're here, he said softly, pulling back to look at her. I was afraid. Sansa told me you'd gone off alone. Arya mustered a small smile. I had things to settle, but Sansa asked me to represent the North at the council. That's why I'm here? Jon studied her face, and she saw the worry lines that had grown deeper since his time in Winterfell. The knowledge of his Targaryen heritage must weigh on him. I'm glad, he murmured. We need every bit of sense we can get. Daenerys, she's trying to rebuild, but it's not easy. And there's tension with the lords of Westeros who remain. Arya glanced out over the bay, then back at Jon. Tell me what I can do to help. He looked both grateful and burdened. Tomorrow, the Great Council meets in the throne room. Daenerys will preside. Lords and ladies from across the 7 kingdoms, or what's left of them, are coming to decide on a new order. Some might push for independence. Others want to reaffirm the Targaryen rule. The North's voice matters, especially after all we've suffered. She nodded. I'll speak if I must. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I missed you, Arya. We didn't have enough time together in Winterfell before everything fell apart. She softened. I missed you too. Let's make sure we have more time after this is done, if it ever ends. He managed a faint smile, and for a moment the old bond they shared felt as strong as ever. Then a distant horn sounded from the bay, another ship arriving, perhaps. Jon sighed. I have to go. Daenerys is expecting me to greet some new arrival from Dorne, I believe. We can speak tonight or tomorrow after the council. There's a lot I want to tell you. Arya nodded. Go, then. I'll be around. With that he departed, leaving Arya alone on the balcony once more. She felt oddly lighter having seen him. Despite the burdens he carried, Jon was still her brother in all but blood, and that bond gave her some measure of comfort. The day passed in a whirl. Arya reconvened with the Hound, who grumbled about the stuffiness of the keep. She confirmed that her guards were settled, instructed them to keep their eyes open for trouble, and tried not to let the looming council weigh too heavily on her mind. She thought of Tyrion Lannister, whom she had not yet encountered. He was the hand of the queen, presumably orchestrating the political maneuvers. She wondered how he felt about his sister's death. He might suspect the truth, though he was clever enough to keep it to himself if so. Night fell, and she retired to her chamber, though she slept restlessly. Morning came sooner than she would have liked. She dressed in practical leathers rather than a fine gown, ignoring any side-eyed looks from the servants. If she was going to speak for the North, she would do so as Arya Stark, not a Southern lady. She strapped her Valyrian steel dagger at her hip. Outside her door, the Hound waited. Big day, he said sarcastically. All the lords and ladies gathered to talk themselves to death. She shrugged. Better than another war if it can be avoided. They walked together to the throne room, her 10 northern guards trailing behind. The vast hall loomed ahead, decorated with Targaryen banners. Guards in black and red lined the walls. The Iron Throne, unchanged in its harsh, spiky glory, stood on its dais. Seated upon it was Daenerys Targaryen, dressed in a regal gown of black and crimson, silver hair braided in an intricate crown. Grey Worm stood beside her, and to the other side was Tyrion, wearing the pin of the hand. Various highborn representatives filled the chamber, their voices a low murmur. Yara Greyjoy, representatives from Dorne, a scattering of Stormland's bannermen, and even a few Reach lords who had not sworn fealty to House Tyrell or House Tarly. Jon Snow stood near the dais, his expression grave. Ser Davos was at his side, along with Varys, who looked more subdued than Arya remembered. The room was hushed by the time Arya entered. People parted to let her through, and whispers followed her steps. She spotted Bronn among the crowd, leaning casually against a pillar, a curious smirk on his face. Samwell Tarly was also present, wearing maester's robes, standing beside a tall man who looked to be from Old Town. Daenerys's gaze swept over the assembly and landed on Arya. It was not a warm look, but neither was it openly hostile. Perhaps Daenerys recognized the threat and the value Arya presented. Tyrion's eyes flickered with something like apprehension. The last time Arya had seen him up close, it had been in Winterfell, right before the battle against the dead. She offered a small nod, which he returned. A herald announced Arya Stark of Winterfell here to represent the North. She moved to stand near Jon, who shot her a faint, reassuring smile. Daenerys' voice rang out clear and commanding. We gather to determine the fate of these 7 kingdoms, whether they remain 7 or become fewer. We gather to forge a peace after years of war. Tyrion spoke next, carefully laying out the agenda, the terms for each region's allegiance, the question of who would serve as Warden of the West now that Cersei and Jaime were gone, the arrangement for the Iron Islands, and the matter of Dorne's new prince. It was a litany of concerns, all overshadowed by the knowledge that Daenerys was the most powerful figure in the room, with 2 dragons, Drogon and Rhaegal, still under her command, albeit battered from past battles. Drogon's presence was rumored near the dragon pit, a silent reminder of her might. One by one, lords and ladies stepped forward to voice their positions. Some pledged fealty outright, hoping to curry favor. Others hesitated, voicing concerns about the destruction King's Landing had suffered, about the stories of dragonfire unleashed upon armies. Yara Greyjoy reaffirmed her oath to Daenerys in exchange for the Iron Islands' partial autonomy. The Dornish envoy expressed cautious acceptance of Targaryen rule, provided certain privileges were maintained. When it was Arya's turn to speak for the North, she stepped forward. She could sense the eyes upon her. She felt the hush of the crowd, waiting to see if the girl who slew the Night King had anything to say about fealty. Jon watched her intently, as did Daenerys, her violet eyes unblinking. Arya took a breath. The North has suffered more than most. We fought the army of the dead on our own soil, and we lost many. We never wanted to bend the knee to any southern ruler. Yet we recognized the need to join forces to protect all living things. My sister, Sansa, remains Lady of Winterfell. She has entrusted me to speak on her behalf. She paused, scanning the gathered lords. Queen Daenerys aided us against the dead. For that we are grateful. But the North's loyalty must be earned continuously, not demanded by birthright. We ask that our people be allowed to govern themselves in matters of local law and defense. We will join with the rest of the realm to fight external threats, but we must be free to protect our culture and our lands in our own way. A ripple of murmurs passed through the hall. Some seemed sympathetic, others affronted by the notion of partial independence. Daenerys' lips thinned. You speak of wanting the North to be separate. Are you declaring yourselves wholly independent from the Iron Throne? Arya considered her words carefully. My sister would prefer full independence. But I'm proposing a middle path, greater autonomy under a loose fealty. We do not wish for more war. We wish for peace and to rebuild. That is our main condition to acknowledge Targaryen rule. Attention coiled in Daenerys' expression. Tyrion intervened smoothly. Your Grace, perhaps we can find a compromise. The North has unique circumstances, its harsh winters, its distance from the capital. There is precedent for special arrangements with frontier regions. Daenerys seemed to weigh this, her gaze flicking to Jon, who stood with a quiet plea in his eyes. She exhaled. We will discuss this further. But know this, I am Queen of the 7 Kingdoms. I will not see them splinter into petty realms. Arya nodded, stepping back. She felt a small measure of relief that Daenerys had not outright refused. The assembly continued with more debate. Voices rose in heated argument over boundaries, taxes, and appointments of new wardens. Daenerys' claim rested heavily on her dragons. No one was eager to provoke another display of fire and blood. Jon occasionally spoke, urging cooperation. Arya observed that many lords deferred to Tyrion for practical negotiations. The dwarf managed each dispute with a weary but practiced diplomacy. At one point, Varys suggested a council of regional leaders, a new form of governance that would share power and reduce the risk of tyrants. Arya noted that Daenerys listened but did not commit. Her identity as the breaker of chains conflicted with the old Targaryen tradition of absolute monarchy. A subtle tension underlay every exchange. As the hours wore on, the crowd grew restless. Finally, Daenerys signaled an end to the session. We will reconvene in 2 days to finalize these agreements. Until then, my lords, my ladies, I invite you to enjoy my hospitality. The assembly broke apart. Conversations sparked in corners as delegates debated the day's events. Arya found herself approached by Tyrion. He bowed his head slightly. Lady Arya, may we speak? She eyed him warily but nodded. They moved to a quieter alcove out of earshot from the throng. Tyrion regarded her with an unreadable expression. You've changed a great deal since I last saw you as a child. Arya shrugged. We've all changed. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Then he said, voice low, I know what happened to my sister. Her pulse quickened. She kept her face neutral. What do you mean? Cersei was monstrous, that much is true. But she was still my sister. His eyes flicked to the dagger at her side. I have no proof, of course. But I am not a fool. Arya felt a stir of tension. So what now? Are you going to call the guards? Tyrion sighed heavily, rubbing his temple. No. The truth is, she was beyond redemption. She clung to power even as the dead threatened us all. And she brought the city to ruin. He paused, searching her face. But you must understand, Daenerys still has suspicions. She might not publicly accuse you, but if she believes you acted as a Stark agent, it could complicate your demands for autonomy. Arya's jaw set. I didn't do it for the Starks. I did it for me. For what she took from my family. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. I suspected as much. Nonetheless, be cautious. You have powerful allies, but also powerful enemies. She regarded him evenly. What about you? Tyrion's lips twisted in a bitter half-smile. I serve the realm for better or worse. I have no desire to see more bloodshed. For a moment, they stood in silence, two souls who had lost so much to the Lannisters' ambitions. Then Tyrion inclined his head. Good day, Lady Arya. He turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Arya with her thoughts churning. When she finally left the throne room, the Hound joined her in the corridor. He raised an eyebrow. Saw you talking with the imp. Everything all right? She nodded, though her mind still buzzed. He knows. About Cersei? Yes. But he's not going to do anything about it. The Hound grunted. He's a clever one, that imp knows the winds have shifted. He flicked a glance at the halls. We should watch our backs. They made their way back to the guest quarters. Servants offered them food and wine, which Arya accepted with moderate appetite. Thoughts of the next steps weighed on her. She had 2 days before the final meeting of the council. She needed to solidify the North's position, preferably without revealing too much about her own role in Cersei's death. As evening fell, Jon came to see her in her chambers, knocking gently on the door. She let him in, and he closed the door behind him with a solemn expression. Daenerys wants the North's loyalty. She won't be satisfied with partial independence. Arya crossed her arms. Sansa won't yield it entirely. We've sacrificed too much to remain just another province. Our people won't accept it. Jon ran a hand through his dark hair. I know. That's why we need a compromise. If you push too hard, she might resort to force. She has that power. Arya's eyes hardened. Are you saying we should bow again? After everything? Jon's face was pained. I'm saying we can't afford another war, especially not with dragons. I'm trying to keep the peace. Daenerys isn't the Mad King, but she believes it's her birthright to rule all 7 kingdoms. Arya remembered how Daenerys had once burned the Lannister soldiers who wouldn't submit. She understood the danger, yet she also felt the fierce loyalty to the North that Sansa embodied. What if we push for an arrangement like the Iron Islands have, or what Dorne once had under the Martells? Something short of total independence, but more than a simple fiefdom. Jon's eyes lit with a hint of hope. That might be enough, but you'll have to convince Daenerys. She respects strength. Arya nodded grimly. Then I'll show her strength without bloodshed, if possible. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you. I'm sorry to burden you with this. She gave a small shake of her head. It's not a burden. It's what needs to be done. They spoke a while longer, discussing possible strategies. Jon confided that Daenerys' closest advisors, Tyrion and Varys, were pushing her to adopt a more lenient stance. Grey Worm, however, remembered the North's earlier distrust of Daenerys and was less willing to compromise. Arya concluded that she would need to speak directly with Daenerys, find a path that did not involve more dragonfire. The next day, she requested an audience with the Queen. Tyrion arranged it, though he looked uneasy. Arya was admitted into a smaller council chamber, where Daenerys sat at a table, reviewing scrolls with Missandei, who had survived the wars to become her chief counselor. Grey Worm stood at the door. Jon was absent. Daenerys regarded Arya calmly, setting aside her papers. Lady Arya, Tyrion says you wish to speak with me about the North. Arya inclined her head. Yes, I know you won't accept full northern independence, and I'm not here to demand it. But I want the North to have the freedom to govern itself in day-to-day matters, to choose its own ruler in Winterfell, with you recognized as the overarching monarch. In return, we'd pledge to come to the realm's defense if threatened from outside. Daenerys studied her, fingers drumming lightly on the table. So you are proposing a vassal relationship with significant autonomy. Yes, Arya said, meeting the queen's eyes. I've seen enough war. Our people have suffered. We want peace, and we want to be left to our own ways in the north. If you respect that, you'll earn our loyalty more than if you try to force it. Missandei spoke softly. It is similar to the arrangement Queen Alysanne once made with the North centuries ago, though not exactly the same. Daenerys' gaze flicked to Missandei. She seemed to consider the historical precedent. Then her expression hardened slightly. There are those who will say I'm weak if I allow such an arrangement. That the Targaryens must rule all 7 kingdoms firmly or risk them fracturing. Arya recalled the callousness of past kings who tried to control everything by force. Strength is not always about forcing people to bend the knee. Sometimes it's about letting them stand. Daenerys' lips pressed together. You sound like Jon. Arya allowed a faint smile. He was raised in the north. A silence settled. Grey Worm hovered, impassive, though Arya sensed his disapproval. Missandei broke the tension. Your Grace, forging a peace built on respect could set a precedent for a more harmonious realm. Daenerys seemed torn. Then, quietly, she spoke, I will consider it. No final decision will be made until the council reconvenes. But I have heard you. Arya bowed slightly, feeling a surge of relief and caution. Thank you. She turned to go, but paused at the door, meeting Daenerys' eyes one last time. We fought together against the dead. I hope we never have to face such a horror again. But if we do, the North will stand with you if you'll stand with us. Daenerys nodded, her face unreadable. Go, then. We'll see what the morrow brings. That night, the city buzzed with anticipation. Representatives from every corner of the realm argued, schemed, and drank in the taverns. Rumors flew that the North was demanding special treatment, that Dorne sought to reassert its independence, that the Iron Islands might rebel again. Through it all, Arya kept mostly to herself, conferring only with Jon, Davos, and the Hound. She felt the old instincts of a lone wolf, wanting to vanish into the night rather than endure more politics. But she persevered, driven by the knowledge that peace was fragile and might depend on her efforts. At dawn, the final session of the Great Council began. The throne room was even more crowded than before, thrumming with tension. Daenerys took her seat on the Iron Throne, flanked by Grey Worm and Tyrion. Jon stood nearby, face solemn. Arya resumed her place among the delegates, with the Hound and her guards at the periphery. The question on everyone's lips, would the realm truly unify under Daenerys, or would it fracture? Tyrion opened the session, summarizing the major points, the seats of power that needed new rulers, the status of the Westerlands, the Iron Islands, and the Stormlands. Then, at last, he addressed the question of the North. Her Grace has deliberated on the matter of northern autonomy. Lady Arya Stark has presented a proposal. Her Grace will speak on that now. The hall went silent. Daenerys rose from the throne, her gown trailing across the floor. She looked out over the gathered lords. I came to Westeros to claim the throne that was my family's by right. But I also came to break the wheel, to end the cycle of bloodshed and oppression. The North has always been different. It has its own customs, its own hardships. Lady Arya Stark has asked that the North be granted a measure of independence under the crown. Murmurs spread, some outraged, some intrigued. Daenerys lifted her chin, commanding attention. I am not blind to the North's sacrifices. They fought the dead first and hardest. They gave everything to protect the realm. For that, I owe them respect. Therefore, I will grant the North a special status, akin to a principality. The Starks shall rule there as wardens of the North, with authority over local law and governance. They will answer to the Iron Throne in matters of foreign policy and realm-wide decisions, and they will aid the crown if an external threat arises. A ripple of shock and astonishment coursed through the chamber. Arya felt her heart pound. She dared not show too much triumph. Jon exhaled, visibly relieved. Tyrion's gaze flicked to Arya with a subtle nod, acknowledging the significance of the moment. Grey Worm stood stoic, offering no visible reaction. Daenerys continued, in return, the North will acknowledge my sovereignty and refrain from acts of open rebellion or harboring enemies of the crown. This arrangement shall be formalized by a treaty. Should the North break these terms, the autonomy may be revoked. But if we hold faith with one another, then perhaps we will find a new era of peace. She retook her seat on the throne, and the hall erupted in conversation. Some lords protested, claiming favoritism. Others shrugged, content to let the North have its harsh winters and precarious independence. Arya felt a surge of gratitude and relief. It wasn't total independence, but it was close to what Sansa had wanted, and it meant no new war would be forced upon them. Tyrion's voice rose. Let it be recorded, the North is now a principality under the crown. The rest of these matters, wardenships and boundaries, will be discussed, but her grace has spoken on the North's status. Any lord who disputes it may speak now. A handful of lords voiced their grumbles, but none dared defy Daenerys outright. The memory of Dragonfire was too fresh. Yara Greyjoy smirked, possibly envious that the Iron Islands didn't receive the same concession. Dorne's envoy seemed indifferent, focusing on their own region's well-being. Arya stood tall, carefully schooling her features. Jon cast her a look of quiet gratitude. She had done what Sansa had asked, secured a kind of peace. As the council continued hashing out lesser matters, she remained alert, acknowledging the nods of respect from some around her. She had slain the Night King, killed Cersei Lannister, and now she had secured a new status for the North. A sense of closure began to settle over her, though she doubted she would ever be truly at ease in a court. Hours later, the session ended. Daenerys declared the Great Council adjourned, leaving the realm in a precarious but hopeful balance. Lords and ladies departed in clusters, some returning to their lands, others staying to negotiate alliances. Arya stepped away from the throng, exhausted by the tension and the politics. Jon approached her, a smile creasing the corners of his eyes. "You did it." She gave a small shrug. "We did it. Now we see if peace holds." He nodded, then glanced over his shoulder to where Daenerys was speaking with Tyrion. "The Queen wants me to stay here, help rebuild the city, but I'll visit the North when I can." Arya studied him, sensing a weight still pressing on him. "And your claim, what do you plan to do about it?" Jon's face darkened momentarily. "I've told her I don't want the throne. I've no interest in titles. I'm a Stark in my heart. Let the realm acknowledge her. I just want to ensure no more innocents burn." Arya recalled how close the city had come to a worse fate if Daenerys had decided to unleash her dragons fully. She nodded. "Then I hope she listens to you." He pulled her into a quick embrace. "Thank you, Arya, for coming, for fighting, for being my sister." The warmth of his words cut through the formalities. Then he released her, turning back to the Queen. Arya watched him go, an ache in her chest. She wondered if he would ever truly find peace. She left the throne room, stepping out into a courtyard where the sun was beginning to set. The sky glowed orange and pink over the city's rooftops. The Hound was leaning against a wall, arms folded, as if waiting for her. So, the North got what it wanted, did it? She joined him, letting the cooling air wash over her. "More or less," he snorted. "Think the realm will hold together? Or will they all tear each other apart again in a few years?" Arya watched the swirling dust motes in the dying sunlight. "I don't know. Maybe we've bought some time." He nodded, gaze distant. "That's all we ever do. Buy time until the next fight." They stood in companionable silence, two survivors of countless battles, burdens of blood on their hands. Arya felt a flicker of something like hope. She had come to King's Landing to represent her family, and she was leaving with a fragile peace. The future was uncertain, but it belonged to those willing to shape it. Soon, she would head back to Winterfell, bearing the news of this new arrangement. She could imagine Sansa's relief, Bran's inscrutable acceptance. Perhaps she would roam again after that, see what lay west of Westeros, or explore new horizons. But for now, she had done her duty not as the Faceless Men's assassin or as a nameless wanderer, but as Arya Stark of the North. She lifted her gaze to the reddening sky. The ghosts of her past felt quieter now, her father's voice, Cersei's final gasp, the shimmer of the Night King in his last moment. She had walked through death and vengeance to reach this point. Maybe, for the first time in her life, she could walk forward into a future shaped by something other than hatred. The Hound pushed off the wall, grumbling, "Come on, girl. Let's find some ale before the night grows old." Arya turned, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "You go ahead. I'll join you in a bit." He shrugged and moved off. Arya lingered, taking a final look at the city that had once been her darkest battlefield. Now it was a place of uncertain rebirth, the seat of a new queen who had granted a compromise. The wheel had not been entirely broken, but it had been cracked. It was a start. She inhaled the warm air, remembering all that had brought her here. Then she stepped forward, heading in the direction of the stables and the old courtyard that overlooked Blackwater Bay. This time, she was not running away under cover of night, nor was she stalking her next kill. She was simply Arya Stark, walking with her head high, free of the list that had once defined her, ready to face whatever lay beyond the walls of King's Landing and beyond the horizon of the life she had shaped for herself. And for now, that was enough.